It's absolutely thrilling to have Martina Lauchengco, who's our next speaker, come. Martina is with the Silicon Valley Product Group. I hope I have gotten that right. But beyond, and moreover, she is incredibly active in working with startups across the Silicon Valley community. And we are so lucky that she is taking her time to be with us today to talk to you all a little bit about talking to the customer. And with that, I'll let her talk herself and give her a round of applause and a welcome.
So how many of you here have already tried to do a startup? What was that? Tried or did? Tried or did. Already done a startup or already tried a startup. So about a quarter of you. OK. And so how many of you aspire to and haven't even got a notion of an idea? Just I'm trying to get a sense of where you are on the spectrum. OK, so most of you either have an idea or have tried something. Well, for those of you that have tried, I'll just start off with a little story. The first class, I actually teach here in Berkeley. I'm a lecturer in the engineering master's program. And the very first class we taught, which was 2011, there was a group of absolute standout students that got the best grade in the marketing module. They were just really, really diverse international group. It was the lead of the group basically was this Chinese guy that was raised in Germany. He's like, it's really weird. I speak German. I don't look like I'm from Germany. I go to China. They say, you are so German and not Chinese. It's like, so my given home, which is America, is where I feel most at home, even though I'm culturally not here at all. So just a really interesting person. They tried startup after startup. They're now on idea number 4, but they're in the middle of closing an actual seed round from multiple different investors. He's together with some of his classmates. So for me, as someone that teaches the next generations of entrepreneurs, it's really exciting to see that come all the way back, where they now have a good enough idea that they're actually putting it out there in the world. And we're at CES last week. So it will happen. And what I will say is if you are in the startup community and you aspire to be an entrepreneur, try many times. Try many times in school. Do little Kickstarter projects. It's the experience of going through ideation that you learn what a good idea is, that you learn how to take it to market. And listening to me talk about this will never be a substitute for you experiencing it yourself. So my uber lesson here is go out there and do it. So speaking of going out there and doing it, here are 2 guys that do just that. So this guy's name is Marco. These are actual people. And the guy on your right's name is Nate. And around 2007, 2008, they saw the exact same problem, which is, gosh, there's all this really cool content out there, but I don't necessarily have time to read it when I encounter it, so I'd like a place to look at it later. This is before mobile was what it is today. So Marco was the lead developer of Tumblr. How many of you have heard of Tumblr? Yeah, everybody. All right, so a luminary by engineering standards. He does his own weekly podcast. He created this product called Instapaper in 2008. He was its sole developer. Nate, on the right-hand side, was a self-taught code slinger that worked for an agency in Minnesota. And he basically created this all by himself on weekends and sent it out to his friends in 2007 saying, hey, I've had a need for this, and maybe you will too. Was its sole developer and slowly built up over 1 million users just from that nascent email that he sent out to friends and family. Now, for those of you that, let's say you guys each had $500,000 in seed funding that you could give to one of these 2 guys, by a simple show of hands, how many of you would choose Marco? So I'm going to guess about a quarter. Why are you choosing Marco? For those who put their hands up. Why did you choose Marco? He has credibility. You're like, yeah, he's obvious. He's done it before. Yeah.
Can the microphones only because we're recording this?
Yeah, or I'll repeat with the answer. He has credibility because he's done it before. Who else chose Marco? Why'd you choose Marco?
I think he's doing more than word of mouth. He's doing a lot of PR, trying to build himself up. So I think that'd be great for just awareness for his product.
He's got a built-in promotional channel because of that podcast. So he can actually do promotion. He's doing his own PR. So he's thinking about actually getting out to market. Who else chose Marco? Anyway, there are more hands. Anyone else want to volunteer why they chose Marco? All right, I'm assuming the rest of you either aren't going to raise your hands. Yes, you chose Marco?
Yes, I was including what they said. I think he's person, physically. He transmits more enthusiasm or more seriousness than the other one.
So just judging on, if judging a book by its cover, You're looking at saying, this looks like a very serious entrepreneur. I don't know if I think the same thing of the guy on the right. And all those things factor into how someone makes snap judgments. So I'm assuming you're either not participating or the rest of you chose Nate. For those of you that choose Nate, which is everybody else, why did you choose Nate? Yeah.
He just looks like a jovial apple. Like, I want to hang out with that guy. I think he could be like a good CEO of a company.
He passes the beer test. I want to hang out with him. So he seems like a good guy. So I'll bet on the good guy. All right. Other reasons why we chose Nate. Yes, in the back. Self-learner. So he's showing a pattern of how he would learn and grow, which is what ultimately, if you're an entrepreneur, means that process can never end. And he's proven that. He just keeps learning. Any other reasons why we choose Nate? Yes, in the scarf.
If he had 1 million users just by word of mouth and by email, imagine what he could do with that seed funding.
Imagine what he could do if he actually was trying to get a lot of users. Yeah, so he just stumbled into a great product, but if he was actually trying, what would happen? So here's what actually happened. So this is in 2011, a few years later. They actually had some runway. And Instapaper, for those of you that don't know this story, was absolutely the industry darling. It was the one that basically was defining the category. Everyone talked about Save for Later in, like Instapaper. It had 1 million users. It was only available on one platform. And it was funded with $4.99 subscriptions. On the flip side was Read It Later. Everyone compared him to Instapaper if they even mentioned him in articles about the space. It had 3.5 million users, so more than triple the number of users. It was available on more platforms, in more places, and its premium version was only $3.99. So Nate looked at this and he said, why isn't Marco and Instapaper being compared to Read It Later? What's going on here? And that's when we started having the conversation of, it's not about having the superior product or even more users or even that the market is validating you. If you aren't positioning yourself and having market intent and how you go into the market simply won't see and recognize you. So 3 years later, here's what happened. So Nate basically made that switch. He got funding. He became a real company. In the meantime, Marco just stayed a steady course. So he grew slowly, had 1.5 million users. He dropped his prices. He added Android. If you tried to Google news about him, the thing that would come on top is computer reseller news. If you haven't heard of it, that's the point. Then eventually just sold it to BetaWorks, saying this is just too hard to do by myself. And in the meantime, Read It Later transitioned to become Pocket. It became a #1 app on iOS, Editor's Choice, Wired Best Of, Time Magazine's 30 Under 30, you name it, it was getting it. It released on every major platform. As mobile lifestyle was growing, they basically grew with it. They dropped their price to free. They raised $5 million. They have over 500 app integrations. They're up to 11 million users, still going strong. The only difference, really, well, there were some product differences, but functionally they were the same. But the difference was in their market approach and where that led, the product and the promotional strategy. So when I talk about going to market, when people say marketing, that really is an enormous umbrella. And it's important to remember that there are many things that go into that. And I like thinking about the 4 Ps. If you Wikipedia this, they'll say like, oh, and there are 5 Cs, and there are many ways to think about it. But especially for those that are in the tech space, this is the easiest way to remember it and the most fundamental way that most people that interact with you think about it. So the #1 P, which is really obvious, is product. You don't even pass go if you don't have product. And so even if you are winding up doing what's called, quote unquote, marketing, bless you, it's really important that you think about it from a product perspective. That's what the customer's interacting with. That's what you need to develop a market for. Then there's the price, whether or not it's free, whether or not it's a premium pricing. There's many, many pricing strategies. It's become a science unto itself. With freemium models, there's so much to factor in to whether or not you're optimizing for distribution or funding of your company. So many, many things as a lever. There's promotion, which is what most people think of when they say the word marketing. And then there's place, which is the distribution mechanism. Where is this being made available to people? Each P is a lever that can propel your business. And fundamentally, the difference between an idea and a business is having a market approach and thinking about it holistically from this perspective. Now, you hear the terms product management and product marketing a lot. The distinction is product management is defining the product that needs to be built. And product marketing is positioning the product for market success. It's not just getting it out the door. It's understanding the broader marketplace, where that product needs to fit in, and making sure all the other mechanisms are in place to guarantee that product's success. So we'll use Marco and Nate as the example. Marco just thought of it as, I have this product and I'm pushing it out into the marketplace. He wasn't thinking about how the market landscape was changing and how he needed to position himself in that so the market was wind at his back. So let's break each of these down and talk about it. So what's a product? It's an item or service that satisfies a need or want. That's probably pretty obvious. The one that you guys have experienced in your lifetime is the iPhone. But I want to talk a little bit about product because it's easy to talk about, it's easy to say, it's easy in some ways to come up with an idea that you think is novel. And Google is a great example of just a very, very product-driven company. And it's easy to look at that and say, like, oh, you just come up with an idea, you have lots of users, and then you're successful. But getting a product out, even if it's successful, is very different than making sure it maintains a trajectory that maintains relevance and maintains growth. And especially for a startup and for an entrepreneur, what everyone's looking for is not, did you get some uptake? It's what's the slope of your line? And it's very difficult to maintain a steep slope of line. And in particular, if you're looking for external funding or you're trying to say, hey, this is a really great idea, what gets people excited is not that some people are excited. It's the volume, it's the mass, it's the velocity that matters a lot. So this is an example of a company that I just met with for the first time last week, NerdWallet. And they've been massively successful at creating search engine optimization that if you have a random question about finance, which is the best credit card, what are the mortgage, what bank should I go to if I'm assessing a mortgage, they have great answers. And there's neutral third party, and they've built a business around that. Everyone that works there, 140 people, everyone works in finance. And they have one guy that's sort of a project manager that makes sure the product gets out the door. But no one other than the CEO is thinking about 5 years from now, if we're wildly successful, what does the product need to do and how does it need to evolve to make sure that it's relevant? Because 5 years from now, this marketplace is going to be different. Search engines are going to operate differently. How people interact with information and where on their mobile screens versus on their PCs is going to be massively different. They need to make sure that the product's evolving into the space where consumers are that are consuming their product. And so they were going, gosh, we didn't really think about the fact that we actually need someone that thinks about product. And that's what the product manager does. All right, price. This is the amount the customer will pay for, and it's also the perceived value. A lot of times when I see entrepreneurs approaching price, it's like, it costs me X, I do a margin markup, therefore it costs Y. Well, there are a lot of pricing is perception of value. You might have a super valuable thing, but people aren't willing to pay a lot for it. So an example of that is in one of the classes that I taught at the Fund Institute, there was this really great refrigeration technology. And everyone that they asked said, it's really great, it would be fantastic. And then they'd ask the question, would you be willing to pay $100 extra for a refrigerator to get that super cool technology? And they're like, oh no, that's too much money. So they valued it, but they weren't going to value it at that price tag. So price absolutely affects people perceive value, and the price determines whether or not they are going to make that leap and jump. So example of that obviously is $1.99, and the amount of consumption of the product at the $1.99 price level versus when it was originally a $5.99 price point. So an example of an exploration through pricing and how a lot of companies do this today is Pandora. When they first came out, they're like, okay, let's give everyone a taste, 10 hours for free, and it was $36 a year after those 10 hours. They got about 100,000 subscribers. And basically what they were finding is someone would basically go up to those 10 hours, hit that paywall, and just re-register as a different user. They really liked the service, but they just didn't want to pay the $36. So I said, well, how are we going to monetize this? Because we can't keep doing this for free forever. So they experimented with, I put ad in air quotes, because it wasn't really ads. They had no ad server, they had no ad sales team. They basically just called up a couple of companies that had called them saying, hey, do you do advertising? And said, would you be willing to pay us a certain sum of money? And we'll literally just plaster some graphics around our interface and test whether or not we can do this, and we'll make it free. So they made it quote unquote ad supported, and their growth immediately quadrupled because the paywall went away, the barrier of entry to have a longer, bigger, broader experience went down, so people would talk about it more freely, and they just saw their growth go through the roof. So they became an ad-supported business. But because suddenly the slope of their growth line was like this, even though they still convert a small percent to paying customers, because the top of the funnel is so big, it's still the foundation for their, it's still one of the elements of the monetization of their business. So they now have, of course, 77 million active users, and that's because they made themselves broadly available and became this platform and could be advertising supported and weren't reliant on the subscription model. So I bring this up as an example of pricing because what you think the market will want and what the market will actually do will almost always be different. I can say unequivocally that there's no single startup that I've ever worked with that has kept the same pricing model that they started with, just because you learn along the way. So it's an important thing to know. And who does this? A lot of people are not sure who sets the price. Sometimes it's the product manager. Sometimes it's someone in finance. It really depends on your company, on its state of maturity, on the nature of the product, and on the nature of the market. So there's not one place where this happens. All right, promotion, what most people today refer to as marketing. And so this is like, what are your ads? Do you have an Asian person or someone with gray hair? What does that mean? Why are we doing that? So thinking about those things. It's advertising, public relations, online events, sales, word of mouth, all that stuff falls into the promotional bucket. So this is an example of a product, P90X. How many of you here have heard of it? Most of you, okay. Their primary means of promotion was direct-to-TV ads, just those infomercials, those 20-minute infomercials. The kind of stuff you go like, oh, really, who buys that stuff and who's into it? Well, the most successful DVD exercise product of all time did it that way. Because they were able to show proof, because it basically then began this swell of word of mouth. And so it can be a very effective means of promotion for certain kinds of product categories. The product marketer's job is to understand that. Because you might look at that and say, like, oh, infomercials, that's dead. That's totally not right for our product. But it's the product marketer's job to know that and say, actually, for who we're talking to, for the cost relative to the information that we're getting across, it's very much a worthwhile investment. There are other pure online businesses like Carbonite, who now is a public company, but they are basically online backup. They used radio, and they found that to be the most effective way to capture users. And their biggest proponent was Rush Limbaugh, who would basically just talk about, and it was all paid for, of course, but Rush Limbaugh would talk about it, and he's like, yeah, we fully penetrated the Rush Limbaugh channel. But they found it very effective for them. So you never really know what's going to work, but it's that product marketer's job to know and understand that. So place, this is probably the one that is least understood, and when people think about their businesses, the one that they spend the least amount of time on, because there are a lot of other things that might come before it, which is logical, but it's where something is made available. It's where the customers have access. It's the distribution points. So do you guys recognize this? It's what? It's actually Starbucks. It's a typical Starbucks counter, and you've got the Vias. What do you notice here that's changed over time? They put the CDs. Why do you think they have CDs at Starbucks now? They do play that music, so it's a great opportunity for them to sell the ambiance into the home. But why else do you think CDs have found their way into Starbucks? Have you noticed where else CDs are? Where do you see CDs today, physically distributed? Drugstores, department stores. The channel for physical CD distribution is gone. There's no Tower Record. You guys have Asperger's, but for most of the world, it's just not there anymore. And so it's become this niche distribution channel for music, for DVD. I mean, you're going to see that everywhere. It's just pushing the distribution into the place where the people are rather than having dedicated distribution. So distribution can mean many things, and sometimes people have to be very creative around thinking, where can I actually distribute my product? The people that do this, when you hear the term business development, that's primarily their job. And so if you have an idea that might require some really interesting relationships to distribute the product or make it broadly accessible, you want someone that thinks about business development. That can start off as a product person, but if it winds up being a very important part of how your product succeeds, that's who's going to be thinking about that full time. So they develop important or novel channels of distribution. So speaking of distribution, I wanted to talk about something that's very important in thinking about where you are in the product cycle and how to make your product successful and how you place it into the market. This is the Everett Rogers Diffusions of Innovation curve. It's actually been around since 1962, so a really long time. But there is no technology that basically penetrates a cultural cohort that doesn't go through this wave. And I'll show you probably the example that you're most familiar with, which is the iPhone, which is when it first came out, it was a very expensive product. It was a $600 phone. They very intentionally were trying to create it to make it this highly coveted item. They also had never done a phone like this before, so they wanted to intentionally limit its distribution. Before we go crazy, let's make sure that it really works. Does anyone here have a friend that had that very first generation iPhone? All right, so what did you find for that person that had that first generation iPhone? Did they keep it in their pocket and not share it with anyone? They shared it with everyone. There wasn't a single party or social gathering that this first crew didn't go to where they whipped it out saying, check it out, I got an iPhone. Look what you can do with the photos. They could not have been a more effective evangelism force for that iPhone. They went crazy. So this was a very intentional market decision to not make it cheap and to make it available to a coveted smaller group that was going to be that were going to be huge evangelists for it. So part of the strategy. You can tell exactly when they were ready to have it adopted by a bigger group because they dropped the exact same product by $200. There was some backlash on that, of course. Then you know exactly when they hit this phase because it became subsidized and became a $200 product, and that's when they started massively going up this curve. You can see basically where they hit these other phases because this is when the exclusive distribution deal opened up. If you look at their promotional strategy at this time, you can see what they were doing at various points in time. So early on, for an early adopter, they care about seeing the phone and the features. Show me very specifically, because for an early adopter, you're displacing something they already have. Guaranteed, they already have a cell phone, so they're not new to this category. You have to show them why they would want to change. And so they had very, very specific, zoom in, all I talked about or showed was a finger on the phone. So they were showing you the product. When they get to this phase, where it's this big fat part of the bell curve, it's not allowing a lot of features. They might show one, and it's very emotional. Grandpa, look at your baby. It's FaceTime. Much more emotional, much more brand-oriented, not as much about the product, because they've already sold the product to the people that are product-oriented. It's a very different marketplace when you get here. Then, around this phase, this is when the Kindle Fire was coming out, you saw them doing very explicit competitive advertising. Oh, you want to talk about the fire and books? Well, look at your bookshelf that you already have in your pocket. So that was very explicitly to battle against the fire coming out and Amazon trying to enter into the category. And if you look at their acquisition pattern, it matches what Everts and Rogers would predict almost exactly. So vastly successful product, and you can see how with millions and millions of dollars and all the wind at its back and a superior product, how it follows the same curve. The most important thing I want to point out is how many years it took to get from here to here. So this is 6 years worth of data. But you can imagine if it took one of the most successful products that we all know, the iPhone, 6 years to start to go on this side of this curve, what it's going to take any other product that you know. So most people spend way more time here than they realize. And most startups spend tons of time here trying to figure things out. But what I often see is they begin marketing here because this is their end game customer that they'd eventually like to reach. But it's super important to acknowledge where you are on this part of the curve and in thinking about going to market, what this group means and what you need to do to penetrate this group, because that's what shoots you up this curve. So that is marketing strategy, which is that customer-centered use of the full marketing mix, all 4 of those P's, to enable your business goals. And it's very specifically to tie it in to what your business is doing. Some people call it go-to-market strategy. If you ever are trying to explain a deck to a bunch of investors, you want to say, here's our go-to-market strategy, and you'll want to factor all of those things in. That's what they're looking for, because it shows a breadth of understanding of what it actually takes to take a product to market, besides just having a great product and then buying some ads. And it's basically, it's the fundamental difference between an idea and a business, as someone has given the market strategy a lot of thought, in some cases equal or more to the product. So here's another idea that actually was our example that was in action. This is Brent and Brian. Brian is this guy and Brent is this guy. So Brian was a huge athlete, Ironman athlete, Marine sniper, just kind of one of those amazing do-everything guys. So big, big athlete, but he started having some issues. And he couldn't run anymore, and he actually couldn't sit on a bicycle seat anymore. And he's like, ugh, but I can't. He grew up in San Diego. He couldn't stand being inside. So he's like, there's got to be a way for me to combine elliptical, which is something I can do because it's low impact, but also be outside. But he found no product that would let him bring that elliptical motion outside. So he called up his friend Brent, who was a mechanical engineer, and said, Brent, do you think you could create something like this? And Brent said, well, I can certainly try. So he went out and he built some prototypes, and Brian was actually riding this prototype around Stanford campus. And the Stanford professor basically flagged him down and said, I need you to bring that to the Stanford Engineering Fair. And Brian was like, I'm not a current student at Stanford. And he's like, I don't care. We just like great inventions. Bring it. So goes to Treseder, and it's just like the Sproul Plaza that you guys have. And Brian literally just rides this prototype. There's one around. And they get so much attention and so many questions that he starts to think, well, maybe it isn't just me that wants this. Maybe there's actually a market. So he starts going and investigating market data, and he learns a lot of information. There are over 17 million bikes sold in the US. There are over 20,000 recumbent bikes. So you know these things where you go like, oh, who rides those? Well, 20,000 people buy them a year, just in the United States. There are 10 million core runners, and by core, it means they buy 3 pairs of shoes a year, they enter events. So for most of you, you're probably like, that's hardcore, that's not just core. 15 million frequent runners, 12 million core elliptical users, 22.7 million participants, so huge running market, even bigger elliptical market. They actually put up a prototype of an animated GIF, basically, of the engineering drawings, the CAD drawings that Brent had created up on a web page and said, if this idea looks interesting to you, please answer our survey. No SEO or anything like that. They just put it up and saw what happened. And in a month, they had over 1,000 people respond to the survey. So clearly people were looking for something like an elliptical bike and found it. Said, oh my God, maybe someone will actually make this. I'll answer the survey. So in the survey, over 50% of the responders had over $100,000 household incomes. They're like, wow, people that have means are very interested in this product. 77% of the respondents were male. That probably wasn't super surprising to them. And over 58% of the respondents were over 36 years old. So they're looking at all this information, and they're saying, you know what? There's a market here. There's something that we could create. So we're going to take 2 minutes for you just to discuss amongst the people that are closest to you how you would prioritize your market strategy against each of these things, and we'll talk about them. So prioritize who? Who do you think are the top folks that you would go to? Biker, runner, fitness enthusiast. Prioritize where, internet or local bike store, what's most important for conversion, trial or endorsement. Prioritize geography, California or national. Price costs. It costs $900 to produce as a point information. And which of those price points would you choose? $21.99, $17.99, or $34.99. So we'll take 2 minutes just to talk about it, and then we'll discuss it. So 2 minutes. I just use my hands. Thank you. Good. Okay. We're going to do this by a show of hands. Just one hand per group. Whoever the groups or that you were talking to will just show one hand, and then you can represent that group's opinion. Thank you, Vicki. All right. So how many groups chose biker as your first target audience, the number one target audience? 3 groups. Okay. Runner. 1, 2, 3. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fitness enthusiast. Okay, overwhelming. I'll just put O. Overwhelming number of you. All right, so for the 3 groups that chose bikers, why did you guys choose the cyclists?
Can we get the, yeah, thanks.
Yes.
By process of elimination.
Okay.
Because I feel a runner, they do running for different reasons than getting on a bicycle. Right? They're going, it's the ability to, you won't have a product or a vehicle for you to move around with you. Right? A bike will get used to that sensation, but they might want to try something else. And also, the biker market is probably a lot larger.
Okay, well, we saw the data. Was the cyclist market larger or smaller than the running market? It was smaller. But you make a really important point, which is the runner just goes out the door. They're not used to dropping any amount of money down other than to buy a pair of shoes to actually do their sport. Okay, who chose runner? Yes, with the glasses.
We chose runner because we're looking at bikers, and people who already bikes doesn't see it as an alternative because they're already on my bike. Whereas runners, we acknowledge that there is a health benefit because a lot of people's knees wear down gradually, and this is the only alternative to get that same type of exercise outside. And with fitness enthusiasts, we had the same mindset where there's so many alternatives. They could go swimming, they can go play different sports. So we found this is the only alternative to running, and it provides that clear benefit. So that's why we chose this target audience.
Okay, great. So almost the opposite argument. Both valid. All right, fitness enthusiasts, for all the rest of you. Yes, you just put your arm up with the beige sweater.
I think we remembered that the elliptical users were the biggest group of people to target. So the fitness enthusiast also encompasses, to me it sounded more broad. So someone that wants fitness probably just wants to be able to move around. And maybe they're not set on either being a biker or being a runner. And
so it's the biggest potential umbrella. It's someone that generally likes to be fit. Maybe they're more open because they're not so deeply committed to one lane versus another. Other groups that chose fitness enthusiast? We're passing down to the next beige sweater.
I mean, part of it was that was sort of the largest group, and then another part was that, fitness enthusiasts, for a large part, might be people that are doing a lot of indoor kind of fitness, and they're like, oh, I'd like to do something outdoors, but I don't like running or biking, so we're like, oh, here's an alternative to do something you're already doing outdoors, and it seemed like a clear kind of combination of things, that kind of thing.
Great, so it's easy, it's sweet spots in terms of messaging resonance. Okay. By show of hands, how many of you chose internet as the primary or initial means of distribution? Internet. Okay. I'm not going to try and count that. Let me see. Bike store. Okay. So this is less than that. We'll keep this really easy. For those of you choosing bike store, why did you choose bike store? In the back with the green shirt.
I think because it's something that we haven't seen before, or something I haven't seen before, and I want to touch it and use it before I actually purchased it online.
It's a new category. How can I just trust it by seeing a picture on the internet? It could be out in Uganda with some fake thing. I really want to see and touch it and experience it before I make that much of a purchasing decision. All right, so those of you that chose the internet, what's the counter argument to that? Glasses.
Since we talked about innovators and approaching that market first, we already have people via our study or our questionnaire that we can immediately just respond, hey, look, we made this product. Would you like to be one of the first people, test it out, give us feedback? So we thought internet would be the best way instead ship it to bike stores.
More control. We don't have to go through that physical distribution process. It's already proven itself to have a big audience online. So very little proof there. All right, all great positions. How many of you chose trial as the primary way in which someone's going to convert to become a user. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16. All right. And endorsement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. All right, so very close. All right, for those of you that chose trial, why did you choose trial? Yes, with a gray shirt. I'm sorry, I don't know any of your names. I hate calling you out by your clothes, so.
For us, it made more sense for trial because it shows like people actually using it. Endorsement, we didn't really see a famous runner using that because it wouldn't really make sense. And same with like a famous cyclist because it's not really a bike or like it's not really running either. So we didn't really see the point of the endorsement.
So an endorsement for something that no one really is a specialist in, will it really have the same impact as someone that's going out there and trying it and actually using it? Someone that chose endorsement. Yes, with the glasses.
Yeah, no, so this is like a very new thing, so you kind of want that endorsement to start a trend before people are jumping onto it. So like, obviously what he was saying about like there's not a professional person doing this, but what about you just have like Brad Pitt or some like celebrity running about it, and like all the rich people that want to be cool jump on that. So. If
rich cool people do it, everyone does it, right? But the flavor of endorsement is if somebody else that I trust is saying yes, this is legit, it does a lot to carry and sway and influence a lot of people. All right, how many of you chose California as the first primary market that you would focus the product in? Okay. How many of you chose national? Okay, so this is obviously way lower and this is higher. For those of you with the national, hands up. Why did you choose just go national? Gray shirt, glasses again.
Basically, well, since we already said yes to the internet, it makes sense why to do it for California.
Right, so basically what you're saying is, if internet's your primary means of distribution, you can't limit it to California, it's instantly national, right? Yes, okay. So for someone that chose California, what's the counter to that? Yes, gray shirt, hoodie, gray hoodie.
You would want to start with a smaller market so you can target your marketing strategy more effectively. And also, California kind of is a early adopter when it comes to technologies and new ways to do things.
If you had to pick a state that embodied every value that this product is about, California is pretty much easy pickings. And it's one geography, it has one general weather system, so it makes it really easy. You can be focused, you can be targeted. All right, last point is price point. How did you choose price point? How many of you chose $21.99? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. How many of you chose $17.99 as the price point? 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. How many of you went premium pricing? $34.99. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, premium group. Oops. Why did you choose $34.99? Back row. Start high, and then you can always room for discounting. All right, so start high, that gives you the most room and flexibility if you didn't get the guess wrong. Whereas if you start low, it's really difficult to raise your price. Reasonable. All right, who else chose a high price point? There were at least 4 other groups. Yes, oh, sorry, in the beige in the middle with glasses.
Actually, it's smarter to have a product that is not really easily available. It makes people want it. So with a high price, premium price, the people who can afford it are going to be rich, cool people, and that makes people want it because it's.
So it's an aspirational pricing strategy where it's like, oh, it makes it a coveted thing, kind of like what we talked about with the iPhones. Like only a select group have this, and so it makes it seem very special and precious. So the luxury pricing strategy. All right, for those of you that chose $17.99, let's just get just enough margin to clear. Yes, with your hand up there.
So we want to sell it to runners, and we assume that runners are not spending money already, so we should price it lower.
Very important, which is like if runners are primary market, so you're being internally consistent. If runners are primary market, anything over $100 or $150 is like, oh my God. So you better price it low because it's already going to be a lot for them to stomach. All right. For the majority of you that chose $21.99, why did you choose that price point? In the back with the black zipper.
We thought it's a price point that's high enough in line with other bikes, but at the same time, it's not like really, really high. So it's just in the right spot, like for other bikes as well.
All right, so it's comparably priced to other bicycles. It gives us enough margin. There's some room to kind of go up and down. So I'm going to circle the answers that Brian and Brent came to on their own. So they decided, based on the market data, that bikers and runners, we need to target them both because they're about equal. They determined, for the very reasons the internet teams chose, easier distribution, we have more control, we have more margin, we don't need a physical distribution, let's deal with the internet. They believed trial was the most important because you got to have people trying this new novel thing to get it out into the market. They wanted to limit themselves to California because Brian's actually a trained lawyer and clerked for a judge. He's like, oh, for legal liability reasons, in case we have a recall and the laws and all this other stuff, so let's be very conservative and let's limit our physical distribution. And they started off with this price point. So you guys came up with the same basic strategy that Brent and Brian did when they first started. So let's see, when they actually went into market, what actually happened. All right, their primary person that they were targeting, they said it was equal across both of these. You guys overwhelmingly were choosing the fitness enthusiast. The runner turned out to be the primary audience for the same reasons that you guys were saying. They're injured, they're motivated because they're feeling trapped inside, they don't like to be. So for the kind of runner that really wanted to be outside, it was resonating most for the runner. So we'll circle what wound up being their lead. All right, whoopsie, I pushed the button. Prioritizing where? It was actually the local bike store. Even though they wished it was the internet because it gave them a lot more control and a lot more margin, for the reasons that the bike store teams chose, people want to try this stuff out. They actually want to see it. They want to ride it. The local bike store was actually an existing physical distribution chain that could handle this kind of mechanism. Tires, drivetrains, if there needed to be repair, putting it together. They have floor space that can accommodate something like a bicycle. So it actually wound up being the best place for them to move the most number of units. And what's most important for conversion? Turned out to be endorsement. And for them, what that meant was a number of different things. It could be Meb-Kaplegsy, I'm probably saying that wrong, but world famous marathoner, a huge endorser of the product. Dean Karnassus, huge ultramarathon guy who basically talked about it. But what it meant more than anything was somebody, even just in someone's local neighborhood, and this actually happened over in Walnut Creek, this woman that was a former runner, big athlete in her neighborhood, was riding it down the street, and this ABC News correspondent saw her and said, what is that you're riding? And she told her, and she said it was amazing, how it had been life-changing, and so this ABC News correspondent basically said, oh my gosh, I want to do a story on this. The ABC News did a story on it, and then CNN wanted to do something, and it was going on Good Morning America. It was this huge ripple effect that got them a tremendous amount of press because, not a star endorsed it, but because it was endorsed by someone that was using it, that believed in it, that was an evangelist for it. And that was way more important. So then that trickled down to eventually being on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and the minute that article hit, within an hour, they had someone buying their most premium product, just sight unseen, boom, I'll take it. So, oops, we're going into this a little too fast. Geographies. So for the reasons that the internet team was saying, like the moment, if you start on the internet, you can't contain it. So they actually tried to. They said, we are only distributing our product in the state of California. So sorry, we'll eventually get to the rest of the country and the world. But despite saying that, they had over 30% of their orders the moment they opened up the potential to pre-order coming in from out of state, where people had said, I don't care, I will drive there. So, and same thing with international. People were like, great, all right, I'll order it, I'll come to America, and I'll ship it back to myself. That's how much they wanted this product. So the minute you're on the internet, whether you'd like to contain it or not, you are broadly distributed. And so it's something to be aware of. Oh, and the big surprise there was international. They didn't expect to go to international for a really long time, but they learned within their first year that bike ordering and bicycle buying is so cyclical that the way to balance that out is by having the other hemisphere basically balancing out your ordering and balancing out what your revenue is across the year. So they went international within their first year, which they absolutely did not expect. And last but not least was their current price, which is, I didn't actually put there, so it was a bit of a trick question. They started off here, which is very close to where you were, $24.99, but here's the most important thing. They decided to do both of these things, go up market and down market. And so they created a 3-speed version that was at this price point and a 12-speed version that was at that price point. And the premium priced version outsold the, not bargain price, but the 3-speed price version by 5 to 1. So the person, the early adopter market that wanted this, they were very serious athletes. They weren't sort of like, oh, I'm going to try this and I just want the bargain basement. It's like, oh, if I'm going to do this, I want like the best with the most skiers and the carbon arms and all that stuff. So this is why this was outselling the much cheaper product. So the reason why I bring this up is they fell on the side of smart people making reasonable assumptions the same way almost everyone in this room did, or the majority of you are. You saw that everybody's right to some degree. But it turned out, when they were out in market, they learned, oh, all those other things we considered, they turned out to be right. And this is a big sea change in how businesses and entrepreneurs build their businesses today. And by the way, this is what they look like now. So they actually identify each kind of runner, healthy runner, injured runner, fitness enthusiast. So all the markets are there. And they have their endorsers. They still encourage all of these other things. But in terms of what was primarily most important, everything that they guessed turned out to be, I won't say wrong, but different. So what happens today is you discover your market strategy. If you declare it, I promise most of it will be wrong. You will consider all the right things, but you simply won't know which side of that equation you're going to fall on until you actually get the product in market. And so how you do that today is by market testing something real with real people. In their case, they actually had to bring a product to market just because of the dynamics of their market. But today, there are so many ways to do this, very, very easy ways, by creating minimal viable products and getting really great market data before you actually bring your product to market. And when I say minimal viable product, and when many people in the industry say that, what they mean is the minimal viable product is basically the littlest amount of something that helps you begin the learning process. It doesn't have to be a physical prototype. It can just be a survey, but it's enough to start the process of you understanding the dynamics of the marketplace. So here are some examples of MVPs. It can be a physical prototype, which is what Brian and Brent wrote around Tressiter, and that's what kind of started their whole ball rolling. It can be a software prototype, much cheaper to produce, a lot easier, where you can just proxy a lot of the behaviors, and there's so much prototyping software out there now. It's a really easy thing to do, even for a pure mobile app. Visual prototypes, again, you can do the same thing, build in expected actions, but it doesn't even have to be fancy. It can just be a series of boards. Messaging trials to web landing pages. So for some of our students that have like the medical translational students, their technologies are years and years away of actually being real, but they have to still get data on whether or not this will have market uptake. And so what a lot of them do is they do Google ad buys, and they trial different messaging. Is this interesting as a cholesterol assay or as a heart attack prevention indicator? And just those two things tested against one another yielded tremendous results in terms of them understanding where they would get traction in the marketplace. Small ad buys to test messaging conversion rates. Where does it go through? And I'll talk a lot about the say-do gap. If you do a survey, lots of people say, oh yeah, I love that. Oh, it's really, really great. But will they actually do it? And a lot of what you want to test is will they actually act? And so a great market test doesn't just test interest. It actually tests propensity to act. Would you do this in place of X? Or would you be willing to give up your existing technology for Y? Because that's testing giving up something or committing in some way. And that's the more important thing from a market perspective. Because, by the way, everyone says they're interested in everything. Oh, yeah, sounds like a great idea. But when you ask them for money or when you ask them to do it, they don't. Lots of people do this for early technologies, videos showing how it will work. So I guess it was last semester, we had autonomous driving vehicles, which of course none of them actually exist yet. And so a lot of the students basically just faked it and did these videos. Like they had people down here driving the car, and they showed the video of the car driving itself in valet parking. But all those things to just sell the idea so people understood the vision behind something. So that's an MVP as well. And then surveys is a tried and true way of doing it, but I like to talk not just about large surveys, which everyone thinks about, but something called micro surveys. It's just a technique where you literally ask just 1 or 2 questions. You ask it not in surveyese, which is which of the following would you blah, 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 but you ask, why did you leave the site? What could we do better? You talk to them like a human being, and you actually ask intentionally for an unadulterated response in any way. You don't want them to respond to a select choice. You want them just to write in their natural language. Because if they're writing a response the way they think about it, you actually learn a lot just in how they respond and in the words that they choose to use. The most important thing with the market tests is you're trying to validate your assumptions with real potential customers. So another thing that happens when, when my students go out and run market tests is they're like, okay, great, I'm going to go ask all my student buddies on Facebook. And so yeah, they're getting information, but it's not actually helping to validate the market within the marketplace. The best way to actually test a market idea is to actually put it in front of the potential customer that you're trying to reach. So most people, when they think about an idea or a business, focus a lot on this last question. Can we build it? Especially if you come from an engineering background. Can we build it? And is it going to be cool? Is it going to be compelling? And so they spend a lot of time here. A lot of people that I come to me when they've actually done their idea and they put it out in the market and said, well, now I actually want to do marketing. I want to turn it up to 11. And I was like, well, your product is just not right for the market. But they're so committed to their idea at that point that it's hard for them to believe that it's the product and it's the idea and it's not the fact that they didn't do enough market validation to see if it was the right product. So they spend all their time here as opposed to asking, do customers recognize that there's a problem that you're trying to solve? If there's a solution, would they buy it? That's the say-do gap I was talking about. And would they buy it from you? That's a very important thing. So someone could come out. So there was this engineer that was a farmer actually based in, I think it was Arkansas. And he found me on the website and he just said, hey, can I just do a quick phone call with you because I've developed this really cool product that holds your iPad next to your computer so you can use it as a secondary screen. And I was like, great, sure, I'd be willing to talk to you about it. So we talked about it, and I said, who else does something like this? And he's like, well, there are all these cheaper products that aren't nearly as good or as strong as mine. But they were A, cheaper, B, available on all the channels where people are used to acquiring this stuff. And he's like, why is my product not being adopted? And of course, because he made it very sound from an engineering perspective, he used the highest end materials. A lot of it was hand done. So it was a $125 product relative to a $30 product. It's like, yeah, you're going to have a couple of people that might be interested, but that other solution, it's not a super big problem unless you're totally an organized, crazy person. And, it's a nice to have. It's not a must have. And so are they going to take the time to spend more money and buy it from you, someone they don't know, versus buying it from InCase that already produces the cases that they use on their existing iPad and their iPhone? So very important to ask these other questions. They're as important as whether or not something can be built. So I just wanted to give you some examples of market tests that students have actually run here. So there's no excuse of not doing this yourselves. But you can be super creative about these sorts of things. So I mentioned the autonomous driving. We were trying to get a sense of whether or not people would actually pay for that. So a group of students actually went out and went to the Sutter parking lot in San Francisco, and they intercepted people as they were exiting the garage and asked them, how much time do you believe it took you to park your car? And then they looked at their parking ticket to see how much time it actually took them. And what they found was people were off by an estimated 35%. But what that told them was people don't perceive it as being a problem. They thought it took them 5 minutes. On average, it was taking them 8 minutes. So we all think it's a problem because we know the facts, but people won't perceive that, so they won't pay a premium for the technology. Very important market data. There was another really great one, an in-person intercept at Walgreens, where somebody basically stood there, same time, 2 days in a row. The first person was there with a clipboard, would ask people in and out about whether or not they were interested in sort of an activity tracker kind of like this. And they got some basic data. The next day, exactly the same thing, and they had someone dressed up as a doctor with a lab coat and a stethoscope, and also with a clipboard that said nothing whatsoever, but just stood there. And they got more people interested, indicating they would be interested in buying such a thing simply by the passive endorsement of the perceived doctor standing behind the person doing the questionnaire. Super important, because we talked about endorsement and the power of endorsement. So powerful psychologically, but that was brilliant market insight that they found, which is you guys don't have any doctor endorsing this as a really smart thing. That might by itself be a market bump. Visual prototypes, in-person surveys, these are probably really obvious ones, but the in-person surveys can be really, really easy stuff. We had one group that actually took posters, went down to the BART stations, entrance and exit, and basically tracked eyeballs. And it was like, if the eyeball hit the visual, we counted that as a hit. If someone actually walked over, we counted that as something else. But it doesn't have to be crazy. Microsites from Google Ads, in-store observation and research. Some people were trying to research behavior around shopping and whether or not people would be interested in a stylist service. And so they just watched for 2 hours on each day of a weekend people that walked into H&M and said how many people went in alone versus with a friend, and how many of those people came out with a bag either alone or with a friend. So is this inherently social? How important is socialness in people's buying behaviors or propensity to buy? Obvious ones are Google ads, Facebook ads, Quora postings, Twitter. Last semester, we had one group that basically tweeted 241 professional baseball players just to try and get information on something that they were trying to produce. Analysis of App Store data. There's so many things that you can look at today that are available to you that give you insights about your potential idea or your market, that there's simply no excuse for getting some of that data. It can even be as simple as, I did this one year in the class. I was trying to get information on an idea, test the say-do gap. So it was just a group of people, and I said, okay, I want you to open up this page, and everyone opened up their computer. I want you to watch this video. And if you like the video, like it. 11 people liked it. Then I explained the product. Actually gave them a demonstration of how it was going to work, and then asked how many people would then be interested, and it's cut off there. But that number then went up to 18. But most people believed watching the video that this is the breathometer for testing blood alcohol levels. But when I said, hey, it's not actually just to test whether or not you're having the most fun today, but it's for safety reasons, it's for being responsible. So it's not necessarily about you, but it's for people that you're with or that you care about to make sure that they're being able to make responsible choices. Just that positioning switch by itself, can't see that number, or I guess you can, went up to 34 people being interested. So these small little bits and bytes of testing and trying to find where you're going to get market traction, this was very valid because it told us a lot about how we position it and how it's perceived will affect dramatically people's propensity to either like or buy it or talk about it. So we leave you with an assignment, which is not just to think about your ideas, but is to go out and actually conduct market tests of some kind. And it's at least one. You actually want to get out there. Don't just talk to your classmates in this room, but actually walk down the sprawl, have a conversation with a waiter, whatever it is. But talk to real people about your real idea and try and get some market feedback and data. And do it in a systematic way. It can be 5 people, it could be 10 people. And basically, Vicky's going to send out a survey to all the teams, and only one person needs to answer this survey. But she's going to ask, and you need to conduct this by end of day tomorrow, so it's a quick turnaround, the method that you used, the number of people that you talked to, and what your results were. So, and your results don't have to be like, here's what they answered X, Y, and Z. You can also share, based on that, we found this really helped us shape our ideas around X or Y. And just so you don't think that this is a really hard thing or that we just gave you an impossible task, I wanted to give you a sense of what my students this last year did in 5 days. So it's 254 students. They exposed their ideas to 246,000 people in 5 days. They interviewed, surveyed, or interacted directly with nearly 7,000 people, and they conducted over 130 tests. So there's simply no excuse. It's a day. You have a whole day and a half to do some stuff, and keep it easy, keep it fun, but you will be surprised at what you'll learn just by putting yourself and your ideas out there. So, and that is really the crux of product management, product marketing, is taking your idea, having the ideas, examining that mix, but then really putting it out in market to get some validation and learn from that and go from there. Thank you very much.